Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is sponsored by Utah Animal Rights Coalition. Right now, you can get a membership at UARC by going to utahanimalrights.com. And it's just $20, and that membership is good for discounts all around Salt Lake City to local vegan eateries as well as other businesses, including the Which Side Media Collective. So check it out, utahanimalrights.com.
So if you live in Utah, it's a no-brainer. If you don't live in Utah and you plan on visiting, it's a no-brainer. And if you just want to support an awesome organization because you can and you have that little bit extra laying around, throw it their way. They'll really use it, and they're fucking awesome. utahanimalrights.com. This is episode 185.
Yeah, this week we talked to Kirsten Bays.
I have so much respect for hunt sabs. Like, I don't even know how to equate it. I just love it. I love this conversation. She does a lot more than hunt sabs, so stick around for that. She's quite amazing. Hey, Jordan, what news and events do we have going on this week?
Well, if you find yourself in Oregon between June 4th and June 5th, you should go to the Northwest Animal Liberation Forum. It'll be at the Smith Memorial Student Union. So check it out. This week's listener shout-out comes from Charlotte Malrich. Charlotte said we can shout out whatever we want, so this week we're going to shout out listener shout-outs. That's so meta.
So if you have something you want to shout out, an organization that you like, something that's going on in your neck of the woods that you want people to be aware of, or just because you want to support the show, head on over to whichsidepodcast.com, click on the shout-out tab, and you can get a shout-out. When you get a shout out, not only will we say whatever you want us to, you can record it yourself, and you also get a bandana or a patch of your choice.
Head on over to whichsidepodcast.com and shout something out.
Help support the show.
And get some sweet swag in between. In between, as on top.
Sweet
something.
swag.
And get sweet swag. Swiggity swag.
The slingshot this week.
Wow!
I find that I love this one so much. On the 28th of May, 1970, 40 protesters were arrested for disrupting religious services at a Billy Graham crusade.
That's funny.
I wish that would happen more.
Yeah.
Ugh.
It's hilarious.
It is hilarious. If you like these little tidbits of history, we call them out the Slingshot Personal Organizer. Go pick one up yourself at a local info shop or an online info shop like AK Press. I sincerely hope you enjoy this episode.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side? Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
Well, how's your day going so far?
So far, pretty good. Time flying. So, otherwise, just a very lazy Sunday. I hope it's going well for you guys.
Yeah, definitely.
I miss lazy Sundays. All my Sundays just seem to be so busy all the time.
Do you know, I used to have a bit of that, but I try to make the effort to have one day, and that way when I go crazy on the other 6 days, if you apologies for the ableist remark, but if I lose perspective on the other 6 days, I can at least crash on the 7th, you know?
It's a good philosophy to have. I wish I could put it into work more often. So
I think it's one of the... Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, what do you usually like to do to relax and have fun?
Well, at the moment, I'm watching the last series of Game of Thrones, so that was my thing. So,
ooh, the new one's just coming out, right?
I think the next series is coming out on Monday. Yeah, it'll be some time before I get to see that. I have to wait until it comes out on DVD because, of course, we don't pirate the corporate media, obviously, because that would be against the law.
Of course
Obviously.
not.
What's hilarious is that Game of Thrones is one of the number one pirated television shows. I think I was reading on some article.
I think it is. Yeah, I mean, it is remarkable. But to be honest, they do a pretty good job with the DVDs. You know, when they lots of stuff. So you know, it could be worth your money if you have any, which I don't. But if you do.
I did read an article one time with one of the executives at HBO, and they said either steal someone's HBO Go account or pirate it. Any way you can, just watch it.
I suppose that's one way of keeping the viewing figures up. You know, I think you know, a lot of these kind of things are all about generating eyeballs. You know, for advertisements or whatever. Although I can't really see product placement going on in the kind of world of of Game of Thrones of Westeros. You know, it's like they're about to behead somebody, and you see they've got a T-shirt on saying "Shop at the Gap." You know?
Drinking Mountain Dew in the back.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess if there is any, it has to be a bit more subtle than that. So there we go.
I don't know if you watch Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, but I love how they put all the episodes instantly on YouTube because I don't have HBO. So, but that's the only way I get to see it. I wish more media outlets would do things like that.
Yeah, I tend to think of things that are broadcast as being what you might all tend to share, but broadcasters don't see it that way. They see it as stuff they can sell, you know.
Yeah.
So there's always that kind of tension. But yeah, so as I say, it's just something I happen to be watching. Although unfortunately, it's one of these things where I've had these boxes on the shelf going through the. I say I've had a bunch of people going through the court system. There have been a bunch of people going through the court system who I've been kind of supporting. So that pretty much took up a large chunk of my time this month. So it's like, finally, I get to watch the box set. That's it.
Well, that's a good reward.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm involved in a group which is involved in campaigning against the arms fairs that take place in London. You know, London hosts this kind of giant, it's an arms fair, planes and guns and tanks and all that kind of stuff on sale in London. And so some of us like to get in the way of that, which of course leads to you being dragged off and arrested, obviously. Of course, because, you know, genocide, no problem. Criminal. So they drag them off. So yeah, we've had 6 months of aggravation with that, but funnily enough, they all got acquitted. They all got found not guilty because they were preventing a greater crime. So there we go.
Was that actually the legal argument that they used?
Yeah, that was the argument they used, and you know, everybody told them not to use that argument, you know, because if you want to get off, you know, if you want to avoid a big fine or whatever, you know, there are other arguments you could use. But, you know, the activists were pretty to use that argument because there were such major crimes going on, we believed, in terms of sale of torture equipment and participation in the slaughter that's going on in Yemen. So, and so we were able to kind of make the connection between what they were doing in terms of sitting in front of a tank, because obviously I would never do such a thing. Whereas, in fact, I have, but I didn't get arrested for it. And you know, sitting in front of a tank and then trying to kind of connect that action with the war crimes in Yemen. So anyway, heard what to say and said, well, it sounds fair enough to me. There's clear evidence of crime, so we can let you go. But it was a big media fest and a big kind of, I do a lot of the social media for it. So it's just, yeah, it was pretty demanding, really. But as I say, not as demanding as actually going through the system, which is I think, you know, what you can say about it.
I love that idea that it's like the idea of classic civil disobedience where you openly defy the law, you do it for a reason, and then you argue that in court. And we don't see that as much in the United States anymore of that classic, like, you know, format for civil disobedience.
I mean, I can't comment on what the States does. It's pretty common here. I think after the Occupy movement, which was the kind of classic, you know, mass civil disobedience sort of thing. I think it's remained a tactic that people have used, partly because the penalties here aren't that much to worry about. You you can. It's you're unlikely to go to jail for it. So people kind of do it. Maybe if you start smashing the place up, then that might lead to a different thing. But and don't get me wrong. I mean, again, that has happened. We've had people break into, smash them up. But mostly it's of the kind of locking onto things or sitting in the road and refusing to leave sort of stuff. So it's all the fun of the fair.
Yeah, it seems like pretty common here that when civil disobedience happens and it goes to trial, they don't usually use that as a platform to speak. They just either try to get a reduced sentence or say that they weren't breaking the law to begin with. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think when you're dealing with a court or when you're dealing with a thing, a lot of me says, well, actually, not get your case over in a courtroom. The activity takes place on the street, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas, so there is something about try and minimize the amount of time you're spending dealing with the cops and dealing with the courts and actually other things, whereas I think in this particular case, because the judge, it was interesting because I wouldn't have cast the judge as particularly sympathetic. He was just a very kind of straight arrow, and because I was there almost every day in the world. He's a very straight sort of bad sort of guy. But yeah, it seemed to be a good thing to say, and it seemed to have played very well in the press. So there we are. Good to get out from under that though. It's very, especially it's quite stressful for a week of quite long trips for people. Where you have these big sort of national demonstrations. People come from a long way away. And so when they get arrested, they're like, oh, I've got to commute from wherever it is, Yorkshire. For this, it's very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to go the state over to pay a speeding ticket. So, it's only once you've been through all that kind of stuff you think, actually, you know what? I think I'm going to do stuff. I might as well. If I'm going to be dragged away to a police station, it's going to be the one just down the road. It's going to be around the corner where I can just walk home.
I made the mistake being arrested across the other side of the U.S. one time for civil disobedience and, forgetting about my trial date and just leaving and going to the other side of the United States again. And then, 4 years later being arrested on a warrant because I didn't show up.
They tend to frown on not showing up. It's that kind of thing.
I was lucky in that case. It was Easter Sunday when they arrested me again, and they couldn't get a hold of the arresting officer to do an extradition from Utah to New York, so they had to let me go.
I mean, the only time I've been arrested it was actually a long way away. It was about a couple of hours drive away, which for England is long. Smaller. We live in a smaller place, so 2 hours away is like. It's like being arrested in Boston if you live in New York, right? But yeah, it's like 2 hours away. And, it was just one of these things where you suddenly find yourself, the process where they let you out standing in the cold thinking, hang on a moment, it's 2 a.m. and there are no trains, But anyway, you do find a way through it.
And they actually let you out without transportation? I think that is something that is a little bit different here. I think that they have to ensure that you have transportation,
either through public or like a taxi or something. Yeah,
and a lot of times they'll even cover that transportation cost if they have to. I think. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Oh well, we don't get that. In fact, they'd taken kind of they hadn't kind of taken my clothes. They'd taken my clothes. So I was in this like in the scene from Pulp Fiction, where they're wearing the silly T-shirts at the end of it. I was wearing literally 2 or 3 cop T-shirts layered on, the kind of T-shirts that they wear, right? And it must have been sort of -5. But then, as I say, there was a van waiting to pick me up. One of some. Well, it might not surprise you to know they were animal rights people, so they were there to they were bless them. So they picked me up and dragged me away and gave me hot chocolate, for which I was always grateful.
Awesome.
Did you get to keep the shirts?
I did. In fact, I don't. I wore them for quite a while until they kind of gradually died. Yeah, no, absolutely. Free T-shirts. Yeah,
Worth it,
That's
right
it.
there. Yeah.
it was. No, it really wasn't worth it. No, actually, no. I'd have preferred to have an extra day of my life and not had to deal with all that. But hey, you just go with what you can. But that was because I tend to do two things. I do the arms trade stuff, but I do here the government is killing a bunch of it's killing badgers because it believes the badgers are making the cows sick. So. It's wiping out a couple of thousand of them every year at the moment, and so some of us think it's a really bad. And explain things to the hunters, try and tell them it's a bad thing, and share views. But yeah, so it was part of that. But nothing came of it. No crime, I'm sure, had been committed that I was responsible for.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever find it scary to approach hunters?
Yes, we do. I mean, one of the problems. I remember having a really bad disagreement with a. It was a gamekeeper. In the estates, you have these guys who are paid to essentially shoot animals to look after pheasants. So they'll gun down anything that will eat a pheasant. So a fox or a bird. Well, maybe probably not a bird of prey because that would be illegal. They'll shoot crows or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So, and he was claiming that we were in a place where we shouldn't have been, which again, as you can imagine, is a shocking allegation. But he was, he was saying we'd basically been going through his fields, and the thing about it was, I would have loved to have said, take that and shove it. But of course, I knew he had a gun. So it's like, yes, well, I hear what you're saying. I'm pleased to take that on board, but I'm now going to leave, all right? It is difficult. But most, it's going to sound, I think, I don't agree with the activity of hunting, but many of the people that do it are just regular people. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to kind of kick off at. I remember during the last badger cull, we were running. We had a little vehicle that was kind of going around looking for people who were shooting the badgers, and we came across some people who were shooting rabbits. And the problem is that whereas with a kind of program where the hunters would call the cops and the cops would arrive and they'd be escorted away, there wasn't very much we could do with people shooting rabbits in terms of any kind of means other than what we could come up with at the time, And so decided that the right thing to do was to lecture these two hunters for a whole hour on the benefits of veganism. And they literally spoke, because I was sitting there, I was driving the car. They were literally sitting in that field for an entire hour talking about veganism, how you was away, how hunting was wrong. And you just have to kind of come up with these things. I mean, are you guys still involved in all that kind of stuff, or protesting, that kind of thing, or is that something you've kind of take a back seat as life?
For animal rights issues, I've kind of let it take in a back seat. Mm-hmm. For a lot of the social justice movements here, like the Black Lives Matters protests, police brutality, taken more of the actual protesting route on that.
Yeah, I can go with that. It's funny with protesting because I came quite late to veganism. I've only been a vegan for 5 years or so. Whereas I've been doing the peace stuff and kind of social justice stuff forever, really. Mm-hmm. Sort of LGBT equality, that kind of. I tend to have the biggest networks and if you like, what I mean, know what I'm doing. When it comes to peace protesting, I know what a peace protest is. I can do that, Mm-hmm. Whereas the kind of the badger stuff, which is kind of out in the cold chasing after hunters, is so we were finding our way, at least for the last 2 or 3 years. It's I do wonder about the effectiveness of some of the things that we do, but I do think it's a good thing to be doing, mm-hmm. And I think activism is a general way to spend one's time. is probably even better than watching Game of Thrones. I'm just putting that out there.
I think like a lot of people in the United States, myself definitely, like, I think things have changed a lot, and people are less going the activism, protesting route, and are more focused on like health issues and even food issues.
I mean, that's changed, but I mean, just the idea of how we protest has changed dramatically since 9/11. Police repression, how they approach activists, it really has put a damper on how we would normally conduct ourselves.
In what sense? I mean, how did the police react compared to the pre 9/11 days? If we can remember that.
So they I've gotten a lot more blank checks as far as surveillance of activists, undercover surveillance of activists, with things past like the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, where they can, arrest activists on terrorism charges for things like chalking. It really, those type of stories have really put a damper on it. Plus the way that they go against above ground activists is a lot harder than they used to, especially when you look at like the Shax 7 case, where they were 7 years in prison just for operating a website. Things like that have really put a damper. That there's a general fear of being an above ground activist like that. What that will create and the downstream effects that it has.
I mean, I served 10 months just for refusing to testify in a grand jury. So and that's as an above ground activist.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I have to say, I did hear the case at the time, and it was, I think telling the grand jury to go jump in the lake, I think is a really good idea. Even if it leads to trouble, it's like, yeah, you know what? Guess what? You're a secret court. Get lost. But good defense. But yeah, it's interesting here. I think the way that the cops tend to deal with protest and activism probably does have a harder edge than it did. But I think we tend to forget the big terrorism for decades, really. And so they're quite used to kind of distinguishing between the two, at least as far as, I want to say it, at least as far as white activists are concerned, because, the cops are intrinsically racist. And so, the activists, Muslim activists, for example, Islamic activists, very much, there are obviously Islamist activists, and that's one issue. But also, at least in the society here, people from the Muslim communities, housing, poor living accommodation, poor support from the state in terms of disabilities, all that kind of stuff. They protest in lots of different causes. But what you do tend to find is that the police are pretty harsh on activists who are not class privileged people. And so, from my perspective, I can say, they treat us with kid gloves, but actually it's that we is a very narrow sort of thing. I have white privilege, and I'm very aware of that. As I sound like a middle class person if you're English, but I'm not, in fact, middle class. But I do have that kind of privilege as well. So I'm very aware that when I'm dealing with the police, they're kind of they're much more hands off than they would be if they were dealing with a part of town.
Well, what was your origin? Like, what brought you into your peace work, and then how did that translate into going vegan?
Well, I found myself and it's a slightly convoluted. 1990 or so, I was planning a trip to China, and our plan was to travel across China, going one way, flying into Beijing, and to fly out at the other end, which was Islamabad in Pakistan. And the Tiananmen Square massacre happened, and our Chinese ticket got cancelled, but our Pakistan ticket didn't. And so we thought, well, okay, why don't we spend the month or so we're going to go on holiday in Pakistan? And whilst I was there, we saw the effects of the Russian invasion of Afghanistan and all the Afghan refugees and the consequences of the massive flow of arms that had gone into the region. And as I was kind of going around there, it was a holiday, so it was, we were having a good time. But we were kind of I was thinking to myself, actually, you know what? When I get back, I'm going to start kind of campaigning on this kind of stuff. And so it kind of started there, really. But in true, I don't know, self-delusional fashion, going on the odd march or holding up the odd sign outside the odd building, which is pretty much what I did when I was, a little bit younger. I thought I was like a boss activist, right? And I don't think I probably spent more than, I don't know. It was, it was cool, but it wasn't a big thing. But over time, I did become progressively more involved. But the veganism thing was again kind of strange because I was teaching a class in the local business school, a marketing class. So I was basically teaching people to be young capitalists, which I was very proud about at the time. But also, I had enough kind of awareness that I was also teaching them to subvert capitalism by critique. So there was a bit of that going on. And one of the things that we did for our students was we set a dissertation on, and it was on meat marketing, actually. And basically asked them to look into the marketing of meat, and it was that kind of thing. And you know how it is when you're teaching something, you kind of like to inform yourself about what's going on. So I looked into it, and I thought to myself, you know what, this is terrible. This is awful, actually. The stuff that's going on. And I came across Carol Adams' book. It was actually she wrote a book called The Sexual Politics of Meat about, I think, 25 years ago. And I'd come across one of the follow-up books on this. And the reason was because that we used to run the in-jokes of the marketing lecturers. We always used to kind of show how marketers would exploit women to sell products, right? It was like the thing we always did. It was like, yeah, and here's a serious marketer. It was like you'd have somebody in a bikini sauce or a plane or anything, right? And we'd critique it that way. And of course, the sexual politics of meat, the use of women to market meat is pretty egregious. And so when I saw that, I thought to myself, you know what, I should connect and I should stop eating meat. And I would love to tell you that the moment I dropped Carol's book, I immediately said no to meat ever again. But that's not what happened. It was like years. But it was on my mind. And when I got the chance to test it all up and how to live really without consuming animal products. So I just thought, right, I need to do a bit of research. And you know how it is. I try to remember what it was like to be pre-vegan. You have all these other things on your mind and you think, well, everybody eats meat, everybody eats, milk and eggs and everything else. And it would be too hard. And I don't know what I'd eat instead. And then all this stuff. But eventually I did it and I never looked back really. And that was 5 years ago.
That's awesome. I find myself always having a hard time connecting. I'm not necessarily connecting, but being able to empathize with people in their transition when they're trying to transition to veganism, because I don't remember my transition at all. I was like 13 years old, completely different world at the time. Mm-hmm. And to me, being vegan today, it's easy. I don't even think about it anymore, So what kind of hints and tricks and just general advice do you give to people in that transitioning period?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that, you can get rid of meat straight away. Very easy thing to do, I would say. And I would also say, in terms of what you buy at the supermarket, if you're a supermarket shopper, is, you can immediately stop buying milk and cheese and the world will not stop. I didn't buy eggs anyway, but you can do that without checking any labels, without doing any fancy packaging stuff or knowing anything about anything. You could just say, I'm not going to buy cartons of milk, I'm not going to buy cheese, and I'm not going to buy meat, and I'm not going to buy eggs. Mm-hmm. And you could do that. And there we are. And to me, that's a big chunk of consumption that's just gone. And then I say to people, well, actually, then you start. I'm afraid you do need to start reading the labels. Every vegan has become a label person and start to kind of, take stuff out that way. But I would also say that, you can't just take stuff out of the diet. You actually have to put stuff in. And so, the kind of level, but, you do have to say, well, actually, you know what, I'm going to cook more for myself. And certainly I took the view that I wouldn't eat processed food at home. That's become my jam now. It's like, if I'm out and about, if I'm, you know what I mean? If you're in town and you need a snack, and you know what I mean? There's a thing that's a different deal. But at home, I do it myself. And that way I know that everything that I'm using, at least in the kitchen, is vegan, and it's all good. I guess the only thing I would say though is, with plant-based diets, they're not. You can follow a plant-based diet and not be vegan, and it is that kind of purge of household product. I had a leather jacket which had to go somewhere, and replacing shoes, and to me, it's that kind of thing of. I honestly don't think if we say to people you have to replace all your non-vegan stuff before you're a vegan, I don't think we would have many supporters. So, I take the view that it's like, vegan is a purchase boycott. In other words, if you own a vegan thing, if you own a non-vegan thing, when you replace it, buy a vegan thing. And that was my rule. But if anybody was mad enough to have, ableist remark, if anybody was foolish enough, possibly also ableist remark, if anybody has fur in their cupboard, you know what? I've got no good words to say. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. It sends out a terrible message. I hate fake fur as well. So there we go. So that's kind of where my head is on all that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't know your experience of changing over, even if was it a transition? I don't really know.
I think I was also a child, so I can't really remember most of it, but I think I probably still had leather clothes and things like that because my parents bought them for the most. But
I wasn't rich enough to have leather clothes.
It is difficult actually. What do you do about gifts? What do you do if somebody buys you a non-vegan product? It's a difficult one actually.
I mean, for me now, if somebody buys me a non-vegan product, I'll usually just let them know. But if they're personal, if they know me at all, they already do know. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, I usually will donate it to a charity.
I think it's a reasonable approach. Yeah, but I think as well, certainly by the time you get to a certain point, vegans have to be activists. So. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons you're vegan is to have that discussion.
Exactly. Yeah. For my transition, like Jordan, it was. I was vegetarian for about 2 years before I went completely vegan. Mm-hmm. And the only reason my transition took like that amount of time was when I was 11 and I went vegetarian. I promised my parents I wouldn't go vegan, and it just took that little bit of time for me to stand up for myself and be like, fuck you, parents. I'm actually going to do it.
I think it's really difficult for people who are not powerful enough. A child isn't more powerful than their parents, sort of thing. So there's only a limit to what you can do. So I admire anybody that goes vegetarian or vegan when they're still living at home. Put it that way. My sister's vegetarian, but she and I both went vegan after we left home. Yeah, because our dad, he was a big fan of the meat. But in fact, after about 10 years of getting badgered by his two daughters, and it just is, he's eating less, shall we say?
That's great.
Yeah, that is great. I wish I could say the same for my parents. After 20 years of badgering them, it seems to be no change in them whatsoever.
Yeah, our relatives kind of mock our efforts, don't they? Really, it's like my dad always says, hey, you know what, there's big money to be made in the arms business, and you know so much about it. And it's like, really? I never know what to say to that. But he's pretty adamant,
Just embrace that capitalism. Go for it, right?
Well, and for many years I did. I mean, it's the other thing. Many people have kind of lived these and certainly a lot of my friends who are, probably they moved into these NGO type jobs, and bless their hearts. Whereas I've just had commercial jobs for, a lot of that time, and so I totally embrace the capitalism, and it's. Yeah, there comes a point when Bill, but I think at a certain point in your life, you could hopefully at least make a switch at least part time, and so I think that's usually a good thing. But I had when I left college like everybody else, so it's like work for the evil capitalists or not really.
And I was just gonna say. Going back to the family thing, I think family is just always the hardest thing, but I can say my family finally is getting better, and I'm very proud of them. My mom's finally a vegetarian, and my dad's eating less and less meat, so it can happen.
Yeah, I think over time, it's we are influenced by our families, and they are influenced by us. You can move the dial. I'm not entirely sure my dad will ever become a card-carrying member of the animal rights movement, put it that way. But I think as well, it's a good thing because you can, I don't know, you can actually realize that most people in most circumstances are not activists. They're, getting on with the day, trying to, get the kids to school, that kind of stuff. So family does at least keep us grounded.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do people ask you for advice on becoming an activist or organizing at all? Because we get that a lot, and sometimes I struggle with good advice to give to people.
Well, they kind of do, if only because I give talks. I give talks on how to do it, so I suppose they are going to ask my advice. I do speaking stuff for different organizations, and people do ask, how can I get started? How can I, what can you do? And it's a difficult question. But I always, I don't know about you, but I've been to these activist meetings, and you tend to see the same kind of faces all around, Mm-hmm. And I think, it's very easy for all of us to kind of, and don't get social media, right? I like using social media. But it's very easy for all of us to say, well, that's where my activism kind of ends. I've signed the petition, I've shared it on Twitter or Facebook, and that's it. And I think, for thing to do, because you can't do everything right. But for the things you're really prepared to kind of suit up for, you should actually suit up and go and do something. Whatever it is, something in the real world. Something you feel passionate, whether that's leafleting outside a store selling fur, which is cool, or whether it's blockading an arms fair, or whether it's creeping around in the dark doing whatever that might involve with that. Then I think you should do it. I don't know.
What would you like to see happening more in both movements, the animal rights movement and in the peace movements?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think in the animal rights movement, I think we still suffer from what Barry Hall back in, goodness me, the 80s and early 90s. People are pretty well prepared to buy the T-shirts, and they're pretty prepared to live the vegan lifestyle in the sense of swapping recipes. There are a small group of very tired people who are prepared to go out and kind of get stuff done, and whatever that stuff might be, and however you define that. I think animal rights itself would do much better to return to that level of activism, which it was fairly. but that criticism that there are more lifestyle people than there are activists, I think, is a long-standing problem that you see in the animal rights movement. I think in the peace movement, the issue is really, you can be in the peace movement without making any changes to your life. It's like, yeah, I support peace. Well, you're in. I think the peace movement, at least here, has been, certainly in the last say 3 or 4 years, has been very effective. Am I hearing a doggy on the other end of that? Is that one of your dogs?
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right. That's yeah, we have. I certainly can appreciate the animals floating around. So the peace movement, the job of the peace movement is a slightly different job, which is it needs to actually turn the goodwill it has from the public and the effectiveness of its, should we say, the direct action part of its campaigns into real political change, and that is a bigger problem.
Having that political action being a bigger problem, how do you address that in the peace movement?
Well, the issue is really it's a different issue. Animal rights movement. The big problem is consumption. People consume animal products in vast quantities, right? And therefore, persuading people that that's a really not a good idea actually leads to tangible outcomes. But the thing is that arms sales, which is kind of where I tend to focus on, if you like, they're decided by governments. And governments can actually ignore the public if they want to on these kind of things. But typically what they do is they would spin the line that says activism dying, as I say it. They'll say, hey, every arms sale is monitored. We have the most robust controls in the world, they would say. Don't worry about it. The government is handling the problem. And I hear that and you think, oh, well, that's okay then. Well, no, it's not. Because what they don't say is that actually they actively promote arms sales. And what they don't say is that, the Prime Minister of this country travels repeatedly to Saudi Arabia to sell big weapons systems. The idea that suddenly some regulator is going to say, oh, you know what, the Saudi Arabians are using the jets to kind of murder people in the thousands, which, by the way, they are. But you know what, the Prime Minister's just sold them a jet, so we're going to ban the export. What is that? That's not the real world. The real world is that the jets will get sold, and British industry will be happy. The government of Saudi Arabia will be happy. World peace, according to them, would be progressed. But it's a bit of the bombs start falling. You're thinking, what the hell happened? I thought, and that's it. So the job of the peace movement, if you like, is to actually be able to say to David Cameron when he's going to Saudi Arabia, actually, that's a terrible thing, and actually it will lose you votes in key and will lose you support in key newspapers. And that's a difficult thing to accomplish. That's a really hard thing. But that's the job. Mm-hmm. Because if you ask most people, if you explain the situation to most people are against big arms governments. And I think if you really explain it to them, they'd be against big arms contracts being sold to any government. I
really like that you brought up the Barry Horn.
Yeah, I was going to say that too.
One of the things that I find here is even animal rights activists here nowadays don't know him and don't know the history.
I wish 10% of activists knew him at least.
And no lifestyle vegans know that history.
And, Barry was a controversial figure. I didn't know him personally, although I had friends at the time, as it happened, who did. Mm-hmm. But I was quite a bit younger than Barry, actually. So, at the time when a lot of that stuff was kicking off, I was still at school. But, I think we should remember our history. We tend to forget is that hunters and people like that have killed our activists here. Barry was obviously in my mind, he was part of essentially a plot. Terrible, actually. Now he was not a sweetness and light sort of person. That's also true. So the idea that he's some sort of innocent victim, also not really true. But, along with Barry, there were a whole group of people who, campaigned. Many of them were unjustly accused of some of the things that they did. Many of them were subject to the attention of, and it's a big thing here at the moment, the spy cops, where these cops were placed undercover into had sexual relations with women in those groups, long-term ones, where they father children. Yeah. And it's that kind of thing of, and Barrett, it was that time. And so again, whatever you might think of the likes of Barry Horn, there were a lot of people who, in that time, who have left the movement altogether because of some of the stuff that went on. I'm not saying we didn't make mistakes. And I think if you, certainly, I think Josh has been on the archive. I'm trying to remember the name of the
conspiracy.
Yeah, the Town Conspiracy. Yeah, and as you kind of look through some of that, you realize that some of the stuff was pretty off the wall, right? I mean, some of the stuff was not good. But at the same time, animal rights as a mass movement had tremendous popular support in the 80s and 90s, and a lot of it was swept away because of essentially the actions of secret police. And we need to understand that and remember that, really.
What do you think is the best way we can come back from that?
Well, there's one way is the way that we're seeing at the moment. It's kind of going with the grain of the society. It's the PETAs of the world, obviously a big organization that does a lot of different things. But you could. I think I heard hissing there, but you could be if you want to kind of objectify women, you will get coverage for that, and that might help. That might help an animal. You could be very consumerist. You can sell the latest, greatest vegan products, and that might help. But actually, I think in my head, I think animal rights should be a liberation movement. It should not just be a from human oppression. It should be being in support of liberation movements. It should be non-sexist. It should be non-racist. Because let's face it, some of the animal rights stuff that we see is pretty racist. Mm-hmm. It should be, if some of the stuff floating around Facebook about, the Yulin Dog Festival. You think to yourself, didn't we just have a religious festival in December where a whole bunch of turkeys got eaten? Did I remember that? And, we when we do it, it's called Christmas. When they do it, it's horrendous. What are we doing in terms of criticizing that? So, I mean, for me, it's that kind of thing of actually we need to embed animal liberation, I would say, in a good understanding of what's involved in liberating people as well. And I realize that see the world that way, but I think that otherwise, all you're really doing is you are trading in oppressions. You're actually saying, "Oh, we'll save the animals," but actually, we'll drop bombs at everybody else. Well, okay. I mean, I don't know what you guys think. I mean, it's
I honestly think that intersectionality is probably one of the most important things that people can focus on, because I think that the underlying, everything's connected.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the probably the biggest failure from a lot of I don't really want to say more than lifestyle vegans and animal rights activists, but the idea of not having that intersectionality, it makes me understand when people call veganism a privileged standpoint when you don't introduce all the other forms of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I can see both sides of this. I remember doing a badger demo in London. Fascist demo going on, and I knew some of the anti-fascist folk, and they had a chat, and they were saying, "Why are you protesting for the animals when there's so much, where there's so many Nazis in town?" And to me, it shouldn't have. It's like, okay, on that particular day and that particular time, I was wearing a badger mask, right? But at the same time, some of us did then chase the fascists down the street, and it was a lot of fun. It did lead to a great headline. I'm wrong, but there was there was this headline which just had "Women dressed as badgers chase fascists down the high street." I was like, now that's a headline.
I hope you framed that one.
Because I have to say I was somewhere nearby, but such things because yeah, I was I was there with a friend, so I couldn't do it myself, but I did know people who did. And yeah, to me, it's that kind of thing. If you have to bear the stuff in mind, but also diverted. It's that kind of thing of actually once you've taken into account the fact that there is privilege and it affects how we do things, and you're dealing with an intersectional issue. In the end, millions of animals are being killed unnecessarily every year in terrible conditions. That's and that hasn't stopped. So that's that. But to me, that's one of the big sadnesses of it all. Whereas at least in the peace movement, you can see that war and armed conflict is gradual, but the way it's working is that actually governments are spending more on weapons now than they have in a long time. So the next round of bloodletting is already being built up. It's a cycle. So you kind of look at it and go, well, yeah, you know what? The arms buyers are bigger than they've ever been, so that's not going to last for long.
When you put both of those in that perspective, how do you not be depressed all the time?
Well, some would say I am depressed all the time. In the sense of, yes, if I stop and think about it, I do get quite sad about things. But I also, I went to the Angelina Jolie was in London last year, and they had this kind of violence against women in conflict with world leaders and crap like that. I was not invited to the summit, but I did creep into the Fringe. The Fringe, by the way, was guarded by a security company that does checkpoints in Israel, I should point out. So it was like, violence against women, but hey, we'll just for real. So but to look after the delegates, it's like, really. But the point being, I was talking to one of the ladies there, and we were talking about the issues, and one of the issues they have is that who's in she was an African campaigner in I think Rwanda. From their perspective, they're just working on the ground. The war happens in which they have no control, and they have all these kind of victims in front of them, right? Whereas at least as somebody who sits in London, who has a network of people that will campaign, who has access to arms company offices, albeit we have to sometimes trick our way in, shall we say? To me, it's the thing that we can do. And so I think it's just, well, I just asked myself the question, well, okay, bad things are going on. What can I do? And I think the answer to that is for everybody is going to be different, actually. Some people perhaps can't move around so well. So, okay, maybe they can't do direct action, but they can go on the TV, hand out leaflets, whatever. We can each do different things. So yeah, that's probably my answer, is avoid something. And then you can decide how effective it is and up your game. Start by doing something and do a thing of what went well, what didn't, what are we going to do next, and take it from there, I would say. And I think as well to you, it's probably my other little piece of advice. If people are getting depressed, there is nothing more depressing than having to travel 10 hours to a demonstration. 5 guys or 10 guys or girls show up, and then it's a 5-hour trip back home. Okay. Whereas if it's your hometown, it's like, there's 5 of us. We took half an hour to get here. We did the thing. Go home, have a beer. Take it from there. That's, I think, the other way of doing it. Work on things locally that you can have an impact on. And you can see change happening, all around you.
Well, I can't believe it. It's already been an hour. What are ways that people can get in touch with you?
Well, they can find me on Twitter. So I am at Kirsten Bays. You can find the group I was talking about, Stop the Arms Fair, on Twitter as at Stop the Arms Fair. So that's the kind of peace campaign I'm involved in. And in fact, I'm pretty sure the Twitter account just followed you. So followed Which Side Podcast, so you'll be able to see, get the address from that.
Great.
So I think that's probably the easiest way of doing it. And just follow me on there. And I'd love to hear from anybody who's listening to the podcast who wants to do stuff. And if I can help in any way, I'm absolutely up for that.
Well, we end every episode saying, fuck, shit, damn. Would you mind saying it for us this week?
I have no problems with saying that at all. Fuck, shit, damn.
This week you heard...
Geometer by Slide Camp.
Right now you're listening to...
Cascade by Hyper.
Every week we talk about iTunes. And this week I just wanted to send a special thank you out to Stacey Owens, who left us this just quite flattering review. It kind of makes me blush when I read it. It says, I'm obsessed with this podcast so much so that I actually downloaded iTunes, even though I hate Apple, just to give them a review. These guys are really thoughtful and intelligent. Their interviews are great. They have amazing guests that you don't hear on other shows. And when they do have more mainstream guests, their conversation is much more in depth and you hear information you don't in other places. Listen now. You won't regret it. Thank you so fucking much. And she's right. Listen now. I mean, if you're listening, you already are listening now, though. But these reviews help other people find the show. It boosts our iTunes rankings. So go do it. Go help the show. It's free. If you don't have iTunes, you can download it like Stacey did. Because, Stacey, you're the bomb.
I thought an apple a day kept the doctor away.
Interesting.
Apples are vegan.
Apples are vegan, but the study that actually based that off of is kind of a shitty fucking study.
Well, obviously. I mean, that's a stupid thing to think that would be realistic.
Yeah, true enough.
You got to use some critical thinking here.
Yeah.
If you could just survive off of an apple a day, I think the whole world would be changed. But I'm going to still believe that that's the truth and eat my applesauce every morning.
I love applesauce. A little cinnamon on it.
I actually don't eat applesauce every morning. That'd be nice, though.
Oh, I wish I was that rich.
Yeah. I'll just start an apple orchard.
You have the room now.
Yeah. It'll be great. I'll just Halliday Apple Farms.
There you go.
And then Stacy might like apples at that point. Be our friend on social media if you're not our friend. We often talk about things that we don't talk about on the show, and that's pretty much every day. So learn new things and be our friend. Talk to us. Hang out with us when you're in Salt Lake City. Wait, no, that's not how social works. We won't hang out with you. So,
but when you're in Salt Lake, to say, hey, I'm in Salt Lake, and we'll be like, high five on social media.
Yeah, because that's all we care about. Digital friends.
I mean, who wants to be friends in real life?
Yeah, it's so much effort.
I just get nervous and clammy, and
people are just weird in general. Anyway,
I mean, I definitely am.
Yeah, me too. Fuck shit down.
Fuck shit down.
Which Side Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Which Side Media Collective, with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Theme music by Commandantes. Go to whichsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always, fuck shit damn.